Welcome to Sentinel. Today I have a very special guest. Her name is Eva Schubert, and this is the first collaboration that I'm doing with another channel. And just want to explain why I'm doing this. Eva's got really a kick-ass channel called Eva Schubert. And I'll put a link on that to the channel in the description and show you a clip from it as we talk.
The crusading army has been on the road for nearly 2 years, since the summer of 1096, when, following the Pope's call to crusade, they departed from Western Europe and marched thousands of kilometers to Constantinople.
And in that channel, she talks about medieval history, and it kind of struck me because I consider her to be an expert on the Crusades. I've got a personal interest in the Crusades, and that's part of this discussion that we're going to have. We're going to talk about what are some of the similarities throughout history, and then we're going to sort of fast forward to modern history and talk about how do these Crusades sort of apply. So on that note, Eva, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on to Sentinel. We look forward to having you as our guest. And so if you could please start and tell us about your background, and then we can go into the discussion.
Well, hello, Assad, and thank you so much for having me as a guest. It's a pleasure and an honor to meet someone of your background and someone who's got the kind of experience in various military theaters that you do. So I know that you have your own very unique perspective on these things, and I look forward to discussing these matters with you. On the podcast, Villains and Virgins, there's a whole lot of history. That's basically what I do. And as you mentioned, I'm currently deep in the middle of a series on the First Crusade, which is sort of the impetus for our conversation. So it's a subject of ongoing interest to me, history in general, but I've found that the First Crusade in particular, it just keeps coming up. I mean, it's something that in some ways we haven't really left behind. And a lot of people don't necessarily know a lot about the First Crusade, but everyone's heard about crusaders and crusading.
Right.
And there's sort of an image of this in the popular consciousness that is used for political purposes right now, as it has been a lot in the last 20, 25 years. So it's a very interesting conversation.
So what got you involved in the medieval history? I mean, that's what sort of drew me to your channel. And I'll say this to all the Digimob out there. We call ourselves Digimob on this channel because some general called us a digital mob on one topic. So we sort of embraced that name. But I encourage everybody on this channel to go and look at her Eva's channel and see what she's talking about. It's really interesting stuff, and she really makes it interesting, and she brings out these nuggets from history that you walk away thinking, man, I feel smarter. And I did a couple of times, and it's fantastic.
Well, the history strand in my life goes back a very long way. It only just became visible to people on YouTube, in the last few years. But I've been fascinated by history since I was a kid in my early teens, and nerding out on books about the Tudors and all kinds of scandals that were coming up in history. And it was something that I was just intensely interested in. I was reading biographies of Julius Caesar and Napoleon Bonaparte from the military library, I'll have you know, that I found at my local library. So I had a fascination for these individuals in history that really jump off the pages and that you can really identify with their lives, and we just have so much information. They're such colorful characters. So that's really how I got into it. It was a matter of personal interest. For me, what I do on the channel is I try to, yes, pull out the themes that are important, but also give people a sense of the human element. What was it like to be a person embedded in this situation or living through these events? Because I think that too often history is kind of retold as a series of, okay, what are the key events? What are the key names? What are the key dates? And it becomes this litany of names, dates, places, without any of that human color or experience. And without that, a lot of people check out and they say, well, this just seems like Trivial Pursuit, memorizing all these dates and things. Who cares? But when you can get into why were people acting this way? What was going through their minds? What were the motivations? What were the challenges? What are the moments that some people had to live through or witness? Then you can put yourself in the shoes of those people, and suddenly it's not a bunch of facts anymore. It's a real life situation that you can participate in or experience vicariously. And that to me is where it really comes to life. So my goal in any historical episode that I'm putting together is to bring that element to it.
So that got your attention into military history, and then you started this channel, which is doing great, by the way. And then you started talking about Crusades. Now there aren't too many channels on YouTube that talk about medieval history like you do, and you make it interesting, as I mentioned before. So talk to us about this current project that you've got called Villains and Virgins. What is that all? But where the hell did you get that name from? I mean, being from South Asian, I have a problem pronouncing these. So it kind of threw me off. So I had to practice this a little bit today. But where'd you come up with the name?
Well, I mean, I was looking for a name that would basically sound colorful and interesting, something that would indicate the lively story element, which the
What the
channel
hell is
is
that? Is that what
trying.
would you just grab there? Excuse me. What was it? A cat?
This is a cat,
That's the
and
first
every
cat on our
time.
podcast. Check it out.
Well,
What's the
actually,
cat's name?
this cat is usually a silent participant in my podcast in this room, but she sits down and she goes to sleep. But when I'm sitting down here, sometimes she likes to parade around behind the camera and
Yeah, yeah.
she's gonna bump things. So I got to put her on my lap and hopefully she'll settle down and not contribute any vocal
That's all right.
vocal
You know,
sounds.
we're a pet friendly channel. No problem.
But yeah, so villains and virgins, it was the idea here was just to give people a sense of, lively, colorful. If you say villain, then it sounds like a good story, right? Because every good story has a hero and a villain.
Yeah.
If there's no villain in the story, then it lacks contrast and color, right? And virgins, well, I threw that in because partly it was alliteration, the double V, the two syllables, villains, virgins. It kind of it's an echo,
Yeah.
but also in a lot of fairy tales and stories, there's some sort of damsel in distress somewhere. So there's a bad guy, there's a lady over there. These are the elements that kind of turn up in a lot of
Yeah.
good stories. And so for me, I was looking for sort of a catchy title that would indicate a little bit or hint at what I wanted to go into without being period specific. Because while I'm heavily into the Middle Ages right now, I mean, I've done episodes on other periods too. Like there was a one-off on the Blitz in London, for example, that I have, or other periods that are earlier. The Reformation is a little bit later. So, we kind of jump around. But right now, I'm definitely deeply into the Middle Ages.
And it's good because I've learned a lot watching your podcast. So let's talk about, let's transition here and talk about the first crusade that you're working on right now, and then we can talk about the similarities of that crusade with modern times. And what I'd like to do is sort of fence this off, and let's start modern times right around World War I, and we can talk about this notion, and I'll give a perspective about that. Maybe there's a crusade going on right now. It may not be a religious crusade, but it certainly has all the elements of a crusade. And it may not seem like a crusade from the Western perspective, but from the Eastern perspective, it certainly does seem like a crusade. And we can get into that a little bit for the viewers.
There's kind of a division between the myth of the crusade and the reality of the crusade. So let me say a few words about the myth first. I think that when most people hear about the crusades, sort of in popular imagination and political discourse, it's a very black and white story. And it goes something like this. Islam is exploding and taking land, and we have these savage, barbaric Muslims that are spreading everywhere and putting Christendom at risk. And so the brave and heroic white knights from Western Europe go riding off into the Holy Land to save Jerusalem from the evil, savage Muslims. And so it's a very sort of cardboard depiction, which is strictly divided along religious lines, right? On the one hand, we have these white Western European knights. On the other hand, we have these swarthy, savage Muslims. And it's an East-West, it's a Christianity versus Islam. It's a very sort of clear dichotomy that is presented. That is the myth of the Crusades. The reality of it, like any other military conflict, is a lot more complicated and messy. So the call for the crusade actually comes from the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, which is sometimes called the Byzantine Empire, depending. So this is a guy called Alexius Comnenus. He's actually a general who's very recently made himself emperor, so he's a military man. He has sort of a tenuous grip on power because he's seized the throne for himself relatively recently. And really, his ability to keep it depends on his performance. And his performance is beginning to suffer. Initially, he does very well. And actually, curiously enough, he's got diplomatic relations with Muslim groups in the region. This is the second thing I want to say. There are more than one Muslim group. People think that, Muslims are sort of one unified, homogenous bloc. This is nonsense. So there had, of course, been Muslims on his doorstep since the early 600s, when Islam sort of explodes across the Arabian Peninsula, and there's this incredible blossoming of a Muslim empire that takes place between 600 and 900. It's amazing. So Islam explodes in the 600s, and they actually take Jerusalem in 638, which we'll come back to, from the Eastern Roman Empire. But then things have more or less settled down. And so the emperor of Eastern Rome in the 1090s, which is now where we're at, so this is 4 centuries, nearly 5 centuries later, this guy, he's got relationships with the different Muslim powers in the region. Everything kind of is turned over by this new group that arrives on the scene, and they're called the Seljuk Turks. So the Seljuk Turks are from the Eurasian steppe. They are they are Muslims, but they are primarily steppe nomads. And they are taking territory from everybody. They're taking territory from existing Muslim groups in the region, and they're taking territory from the Eastern Roman Empire. They're turning over geopolitical relationships across the Near East. At this point, our Eastern Roman Emperor Alexius Comnenus has a problem, and he says, I'm not going to be able to keep my throne for much longer because I'm not able to maintain my borders. These Seljuk Turks are taking everything. It's a big problem. And he's actually got some palace coups that he's found at the last minute. People are trying to replace him. So in an act of desperation, he sends a letter to the Pope in the former Western Roman Empire, which is no longer under the control of the emperor. It's kind of collapsed and become a bunch of different little kingdoms over the centuries. But he sends a letter to this Pope, and he says, send help. I need military help here to secure these borders because we are not going to be able to do it ourselves. We are collapsing. So the Pope finds this to be a really interesting opportunity. First of all, because there are 2 popes at this moment. And so this Pope, Urban II, who gets the letter from the emperor, is at this moment in a competition with this other anti-pope candidate, trying to get loyalty from Christians across Western Europe. So he has his own problems. And he sees this as an opportunity to kind of increase his profile. If he can galvanize Western European military muscle around this cause, he in effect legitimizes himself as sort of the leader of the Western Christian world and undercuts that other guy who's actually sitting in Rome. Pope Urban II is in southern Italy trying to shore up his own support base. So he gets this letter and he decides to get on board with it. So he starts preaching the crusade in Western Europe in 1095. And he doesn't just do it himself, although we have accounts of his very fiery sermons on this, but he also commissions his, priests and bishops and other churchmen to pick up the word and carry it along, right? We don't have the internet in 1095, so the only way word travels is on foot and on horseback as you spread out over these miles. So it was going to take a while to allow this message to filter out. And one of the things that the Pope does when he spreads this message is he really emphasizes atrocities atrocities and violence that are being committed against Eastern Christians by these Muslims. Now, remember, the Pope is in southern Italy. He doesn't really have a detailed grasp of the geopolitical intricacies of what's going on in modern Turkey and Syria and Palestine over there. He just picked up that the Muslims are causing problems, right? He's not distinguishing between existing Muslim groups and these Seljuk Turk guys. So the Pope preaches this message saying the Muslims who've recently taken over Jerusalem and lots of other places in the Eastern Roman Empire are causing problems, and we need to push them back. We need to help the Eastern Roman Empire. And he really throws this in as a strategic coup. He says, we're going to take back Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is important for Western Latin Christians because it's obviously associated with the life of Jesus. And so the locations in there are the focus of devotion. And Western Christians have been making pilgrimages to Jerusalem for centuries, including the last 400 years when it's been under Muslim control. So they're very familiar with the idea of going to Jerusalem. Many of the knights would have known people who'd done it, maybe had done it themselves. So it's sort of something that's very much alive in the Western imagination. Going on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem as a way to purify your soul, to reconnect with your faith. It's an act of devotion. Sure. So when the Pope comes in here and says, oh, these Muslims have taken Jerusalem and they are, you know, doing terrible things to Eastern Christians there, and we have to go in there and kick them out, it's a very emotive message. Everyone has heard of Jerusalem. Everyone feels a connection to Jerusalem. What's interesting, though, about this message is it makes it sound like the Muslims have just taken Jerusalem, which is incorrect. The Muslims have been occupying Jerusalem for, as I said, 4 centuries, and Christians have been going there on pilgrimage all this time. What's new is the Seljuk Turks having taken control of Jerusalem and much else, and they're the guys who are creating these problems. But this nuance is lost. So you get a bunch of knights, they're going over there, and they arrive in Constantinople, or modern-day Istanbul, in Turkey. They get their mission from the Emperor Alexius Comnenus. He says, okay, guys, you know, we need you to go and take a bunch of cities, which are important strategically for us, and Jerusalem is the last one on the road. So off they go, and there are lots of problems that sort of happen along the way, but one of the things that happens in the First Crusade toward the end of it is an older Muslim group that's been in the region a long time, the Fatimids. They have their base in Cairo, Egypt. So right next door to modern, you know, to Palestine. And the Fatimids have been having these conversations with Emperor Alexius. They saw when the Crusaders arrived in the Holy Land in 1096, and they say to the emperor, hey, what's going on with this Western army? And the emperor says, don't worry, I'm bringing them in here to help me reclaim some of the territory that I've lost to the Seljuks. And the Fatimids say, oh, that's great, that's awesome. If we've got a new power in here to put these Seljuks in check, you can get some of your land back and we can get some of our land back. So this is great news for us. And the Fatimids even send actually a mission to the Crusaders. When they're outside of Antioch, it's a diplomatic mission. They bring gifts, they make diplomatic overtures. It's not at all a hostile kind of encounter. But the emperor is sort of doing a double dealing here, because he knows that most of the cities he's sending the Crusaders after are in fact recently lost territory of his. But Jerusalem hasn't been part of the Eastern Roman Empire since 638, like 4 centuries ago. It was part of the Fatimid controlled area. So he doesn't say this to the Fatimids. So the Fatimids, you know, talk to the Crusaders in 1096, everything is fine. And then by 1098, they start marching finally in the direction of Jerusalem. It's been 2 years they've been on campaign, but they're finally crossing out of territory that used to belong to the Eastern Roman Empire and into territory that had belonged to the Fatimids. And the Fatimids have actually just taken back Jerusalem from the Seljuks. While the Crusaders were keeping the Seljuks busy at Antioch and other places, the Fatimids capitalized on this opportunity. They kicked the Seljuks out of Jerusalem in 1098, and they've occupied it. So they're sitting there and they think this is great, everything is fine. Wait a second. Why is this Western army now crossing into our territory, marching to Jerusalem? What's going on? And they actually ask the emperor this, and he says, "Oh, well, this Western army is out of my control now. They're doing their own thing. They're not handing back my territory. I have nothing to do with this," which is, of course, partly a lie. It's true that the Crusaders are now kind of freelancing, but it's not true that the emperor didn't know about Jerusalem. That was actually part of the mission. He knew he needed to sell them, to sell it to them with this. So he's denying that he's sent them to Jerusalem and that he knew all along they were going to end up there. So now we have this situation where the Crusaders are going to arrive in Jerusalem and they are going to fight some Muslims, but these are not the Muslims who were causing the problems that brought them into the region in the first place. And it's absolutely a bloodbath. I mean, the Crusaders take Jerusalem in 1099 after a couple of weeks of siege, and we have their own accounts of what they did there. It's not like we're relying on sources that were written 50 or 80 years later. We have a number of sources that were written by people who were on the crusade, who were eyewitnesses. One of them is the Gesta Francorum. Another one is written by this knight called Raymond. And so they're part of the troops. They're on this campaign. They're there with their own eyes. And they talk about butchering every Muslim person they found, not just the guys who were manning the walls, the defenders of the city, but they're talking about taking infants out of their mother's arms and smashing their skulls against the walls. They're talking about killing women, killing children, and leaving piles of severed heads, hands, and feet everywhere. So it's a really sickening scene that unfolds in Jerusalem, and they're not any better to the Jewish communities that live there. Okay. I mean, a whole bunch of Jewish people are butchered in their part of the city. Many of them flee to the synagogue, hoping for refuge, and the Crusaders surround the synagogue. They set it on fire, and they burn everyone inside alive. So, again, these are civilians, and even the Eastern Christians in the city that are allegedly the ones who are going to be liberated by the Crusaders don't do terribly well. They're not butchered in large numbers necessarily, but the Crusaders are Latin Christians. They don't really have a good grasp of Eastern Christianity at all. So in their head, Christians are people who look like them and worship like them. Even though they are relatively recently Christian, a lot of these guys are Frankish, like formerly Germanic warriors who are recent converts. They know nothing of Syrian Christians, Greek Christians, and Orthodox Christians who've been Christians for centuries before these guys knew anything about it. Never mind that. So these Western Crusaders go into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, one of the most holy churches in all of Christianity, and they kick out the Eastern Christian priests who are in there, who share the duties of officiating services and everything. Sure. And they say, no, out, we're going to install one of our Latin Christians to be in charge here. And by the way, where is the holiest relic in Jerusalem? We've heard you have a piece of the true cross that Jesus Christ was crucified on. We want that. And these Eastern priests are like, well, we're not going to tell you thugs anything about it. And they say, oh, really? Well, maybe if we torture you a bit, you'll feel more conversational and you'll let us know what we want to know. So they do, right? So this is the reality of the Crusades. Now, it wrapped shortly after 1099. The Crusaders go home. They leave some people in Jerusalem to kind of secure it. But what begins to develop immediately afterwards is the myth of the Crusade. As the word of this expedition goes back to Western Europe, as the Crusaders begin to arrive home, there are some truths about the Crusade that are told, but a lot of the unpleasant parts of it are not talked about very much. So it's amazing that these guys go in there and they manage over incredible odds to avoid annihilation. I mean, they fight a number of battles, and we go into it in great detail in the First Crusade, sort of series, where through sheer audacity and bloody mindedness and cohesion, discipline on the field, they managed to triumph over much larger forces multiple times. So it is kind of a military marvel what they're able to pull off there. And this comes back and it's sort of reported as this great success. The Western Knights go in there, they achieve their goals, they've taken Jerusalem, it's now in Western hands, they don't give it back to the Eastern Roman Emperor, forget about that part of the mission, it's ours now. And they set up some of their own little Crusader kingdoms in Edessa and Antioch. So now they have a foothold of territory that's controlled by Western military forces. And so it's kind of spun as this remarkable adventure, this amazing military expedition that showcases the best of military prowess and chivalry and valor and all that. And the stuff about cannibalism and severed arms and heads and butchered babies, it's not talked about quite as much. So what comes down is this image of the Crusade as this glorious military adventure in which the fighters themselves are ennobled by religious purpose. It's all kind of whitewashed as like it was the devotion of the Crusaders, it was the purity of their hearts, and the courage with which they wanted to serve their God that assured them success and allowed this amazing victory to take place. And it's so effective that it actually inspires a whole chain of other crusades after, and in fact, very, very soon after, the second, the third, the fourth, and on it goes. But the image of the first crusade that we have, it has always been the best of them, the most inspiring, and the one that is most responsible for kind of the myth of the crusade that's come down to us today. So I should stop there and let you say some things, because I've been going on for quite a bit.
No, it's very interesting. I mean, there's incredible amount of parallels with the modern era. And I mean, we can sit here and talk about it all day long in terms of, how the people in power sort of massage the message to their liking, and the most recent one is Iraq's got WMD. And, and by some estimates, over 1 million Iraqis were killed during our illegal invasion of Iraq. And, and we've sort of set aside, although we try to act in an honorable manner when things were found to be a violation, people were held accountable. But we don't really talk about it too much. So for example, the Battle of Fallujah is viewed as this great victory, but we basically leveled Fallujah, so it's essentially what the Crusaders did in that time. So the atrocities you always embellish, right? I mean, there's an old saying, the victors write the history, right? And then people like yourselves go back and keep digging until they find, the truth of the matter. So it's very interesting for me per se, and something that that we've been talking about on Sentinel is to avoid conflicts and to really for the viewers and all Americans and everybody across this planet needs to do their homework and study history and make sure they know where the truth is. And what I'm talking about is, currently, I mean, if we fast forward from what you just described to World War One, World War One was why did World War One happen? I mean, some of the reasons that we went into World War One was, there's militarism going on. All the nations had big, large militaries. There were standing militaries. There were alliances amongst different nations. Austro-Hungary Empire, Germany, Italy on one side. You got France. You got Britain on the other side. And then you've got the United States gets drug into it along with Russia. Russia leaves in 1917, but then the United States takes their place. And then from then on, the United States sort of gets sucked into this international arena. And and to me, the critical point is the end of World War One, because prior to World War One, there were these imperial empires, right? There's imperialism. There's a colonialism that was going on in Africa. There's colonialism that was going on in Asia. The Ottomans sort of controlled the Middle East, per se, and they had control of Jerusalem as well. When Jerusalem was taken back, and then once the French and the British sort of carved up the Middle East, and so from this side of the fence, looking at the West, everybody started saying, this is another crusade. And, we can talk about the numbers at the 9th, 10th, 14th, 15th. I don't know. There's many smaller crusades. There were the greater crusades and all that stuff, right? And so that's what I really want to get into is where do you think we are currently based on your analysis of the Crusades between this clash of civilization that's going on? And is it really a clash of civilization, or is it a bunch of, popes, Urban II, that are sort of puppeteering us, and a lot of people think that that's going on because the United States gets sucked into all these conflicts, and we have been. World War II is understandable. I get that, but after World War II, we got sucked into Korea, we got sucked into Vietnam, we got sucked into Lebanon in 1982, if you remember. Then obviously the Iran situation happened because we imposed, our writ onto the Iranian people with the Shah. They had a democratic elected prime minister that we threw out. Then we got sucked into Somalia. And after that, we got sucked into, Afghanistan was an anomaly because, we're going, and now the conspiracy theorists are out also, like who the hell did the World Trade Center? I don't know, but nonetheless, then we got sucked into Iraq. And then there's a great clip that I'll try to add into this where General Wesley Clark talks about 7 countries in 5 years that we were going to invade.
He pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office that says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. Seven countries in 5 years.
And there's a plan in place in 2003. Now, when I came out of Afghanistan in 2002, when I went back to Tampa Central Command for a debrief, nobody wanted to talk to me. Afghanistan was an afterthought, right? Because everybody's focused on Iraq. And I'm sitting there, literally, I sat outside the general's office for 2 days, and he had no interest in talking to me. Finally, I said, screw this, I'm out of here. So I turned around, went home. But and the reason being is because his head is in Iraq. He doesn't give a shit about, Afghanistan anymore. And so we all went into Iraq. And, and if you remember, in the beginning of the global war on terrorism, we were calling this infinite justice. We used the name, and people realized, hey, maybe this is the wrong word, that we shouldn't use that. And they changed the name, to Enduring Freedom, and then Iraqi Freedom, and we're going to liberate Iraq, and, all this stuff is going to happen. And none of that shit happened. We just, we decimated an entire culture. We lost great young Americans, our sons and daughters, we lost there. And to this day, we're losing them. There's 22 veterans that kill themselves every day in the United States. It just blows my mind. So the suffering doesn't end, and I talk to them routinely that, people have got emotional issues going on, and I try to reach out. In fact, this morning I just called one of my Marines from 1990 in Texas. He's in the hospital. And, so I picked up the phone out, because somebody's got to reach out and help these people, that's our obligation. So where I'm going with all this is, now let's talk about your views in terms of, what you've learned in terms of the Crusades to what's going on post World War I, and how did we carve up the world in terms of this imperialism that we sort of templated on top of the world, and what was the reaction of the people in the region, right? Specifically Middle East.
So I'll make a very brief historical comment, and I'm going to go straight into the politics. So bear with me. I'm not going to go deep on the Middle Ages here, but it's true that when the Crusade is sort of sold, like preached to people in Western Europe, there's a lot of emotional appeals. Oh, the atrocities. Oh, these Turkish, Muslim guys are cutting people open and spilling their guts out, and they're dragging women around by their hair, and they're doing all these things, right? And so there's kind of this emotive appeal to rescuing people. There's a religious appeal to say our holy places, our Jerusalem, these guys are savages, pagans, infidels, whatever, we got to get rid of them. And then there's this kind of religious appeal that the Pope makes based on pilgrimage, saying, if you take this pilgrimage to Jerusalem, it's actually sold in the language of pilgrimage, except bring your weapons this time. It's going to be an armed pilgrimage, boys. Okay. But like every other good pilgrimage, you're going to get all the spiritual benefits of going to the Holy Land, going to Jerusalem, visiting the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Your sins will be washed away. So it doesn't matter how many people you behead or eviscerate, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a holy credit card that you're going to get here. So there are these appeals, but even at the time that the Pope is selling this, there are economic appeals built into it too. Like in his own words, we have records of him saying, yeah, and also your land here has too many people and not enough resources. You guys are all struggling. If we send some people over there, you'll find plentiful resources. And there are definitely strong indications that many of the nobles, these kind of mounted knights who are leading their own divisions of fighters, because that's how medieval armies are organized, they're out there looking for a place to establish their own little kingdoms and land holdings. So what I'm saying is there's a gap between the rhetoric in which emotional appeals for liberation and a sense of religious and cultural identity are painted very strongly. That's all there. But there are also some very pragmatic other appeals and motivations that are very active in the reasons why people are actually doing this. Okay, so there's a difference between the rhetoric and the reality of what's motivating people. Now, I want to bring that right over and compare it to what you're saying about Iraq and Afghanistan, right? With Afghanistan, I remember because I was heavily involved with a volunteer organization called Canadian Women for Women's Education in Afghanistan. And I lost a number of colleagues. They died over there. But we were involved in trying to build up educational networks and systems to help educate Afghans right after the military had gone in. So one of the major points that was emphasized politically to justify going into Afghanistan was, look at all these women in burqas. Look at all these oppressed Afghan women who are invisible in their society, who are being treated in these barbaric ways. We have to go in there and do something about that. No, it was 100% true that women were being treated as subhuman creatures in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, Afghanistan today looks exactly like it did before we went in. Like all of that stuff is back. But the concern that we have about these grave human rights violations is it completely evaporated. So the point I'm making is that concern for the women of Afghanistan was supposed to be a major reason why we went in there.
Right.
But in fact, it doesn't seem to have been, the real reason at all. If you were concerned about that, you wouldn't just pick up and run and allow an entire infrastructure of education that had been built up over several decades to essentially be wiped out in the space of a year. And I've met Afghan refugees who have fled from there, many of whom who worked with our organization. I've been embedded here in helping them resettle. I've heard their stories of coming through the airport and dodging gunfire, trying to get their families out. People who risked their lives, not once, not for a couple of weeks, but for years, working with these organizations, risking death threats, knowing people who'd been whacked for doing this kind of stuff, who continue to work with us anyway because they believed in education for their daughters and their wives and their families and their country, only to find out, yeah, actually all that stuff, we don't really care about it anymore. Oh, did you work with us? Are you at risk of dying? Well, that's too bad. Next, flip the channel, and these people are being hung out to dry. So
100%.
it's a really, I think that it's a parallel in terms of the motivations that we say we're in there for, and then the reality of what actually motivates our involvement and drives our interaction on the ground. There's a gap between these two things. But what I want to say about the political discourse is that we really saw right after September 11th, 2001, this whole clash of civilizations narrative really kind of explode. And for the first decade after 2001, it was everywhere. I mean, Bernard Huntington's Clash of Civilizations book is all over the place. And it's this idea that the West is a civilizational unit which is discrete and totally separated from the East, by which we mean here Islam. And these things are diametrically opposed and have forever been in conflict. It's hostile, and the West represents progress and civilization and freedom. And Islam represents the opposite of all these things. It's backward, it's savage, it's barbaric, it doesn't care about education, it wants oppression and Sharia and blah, 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 all these things. Unfortunately, this is just simply not the case. Am I saying that there aren't terrible things that happen in Afghanistan?
Sure.
Of course not. Of course not. But I'm saying that there's a difference between extremist elements and an entire faith, which is expressed across multiple countries and different cultures. Indonesian Muslims are very different from Muslims in Tajikistan, from Muslims in Pakistan, from Muslims in India. You know, it's just ridiculous to kind of put this one label and say Islam, and then everyone who's a Muslim fits this little stereotype that you've made, and they all want burqas, and they all want to chop off hands, and they all want to stone people. I mean, it's absurd. Now, why is it a problem? It's a problem because, first of all, it's not true. And by believing such things, we actually blind ourselves to the humanity of the people on the other side of the table and the possibility of working with some of those people, many of whom want the same things we do. But if we're going to approach our interaction with so-called the Muslim world with this sort of caricatured idea, we effectively are going to be talking not to the people there, but to an image we've created in our minds, in which these guys are inveterate enemies, and really force is the best answer because they're uncivilized savages who, who oppose us at every turn. Like it leads to a whole bunch of assumptions that prevent you from seeing possibilities that are in front of you and predispose you to violence when there might actually be other ways of engaging and solving the problem. But we're not looking at the people and the reality of the situation. We're functioning on a narrative we've built for ourselves, which is basically a fantasy. We in the West are all good. We never do anything wrong. We are the liberators, the champions of freedom. We don't do, massacres of civilians and that kind of stuff. But those guys over there, that's all they do. Well, the truth is, we've also done some bad things. Yes, it's true that in the West we've made some very interesting advances politically, and freedom of speech and constitution and rule of law. This is very important. This is true. But to deny the fact that we've also really messed up and done some terrible things is to flatten and make a lie out of our history. So we've got a mixed record. And guess what? So do they. Can you find examples of atrocities and barbarism? Yes. Can you find examples of Ottoman sultans who welcomed Jewish people who were being kicked out of their homes in Spain? Yep. And having all of their wealth robbed by the king and queen of Spain? Yeah, he said, come to my land. I'm going to welcome you. I'm going to benefit from the stupidity of the monarchs of Spain as I bring all these highly skilled, educated people into my empire. We've got examples of, I was another Ottoman sultan who I believe rescued or welcomed Jews in World War I. Just to pick two random examples. There are many others. So once again, it's a mixed history. And to reduce it all to the very worst moments is a game that is very dishonest, because if we reduced our history to our very worst moments, it would look a lot similar to the caricature, but it's not true. So why is it that we're going to play this game with the East, where we reduce their entire identity and history to the worst moments we can find, but with ourselves, we want to paint ourselves in only the brightest and best moments of our history? I mean, it's dishonest and it's not helpful.
What I really found interesting is if you keep going down the line of the Crusades, which were really foreign misadventures, right? On the surface, It seemed like, we're going to expand our empire, we're going to gain more resources, we're gonna have influence globally, the world that we knew at the time. But in reality, what happened was it probably put Europe into the Dark Ages. And then the Renaissance of Islam came along during those times, right? When Baghdad and places like that, astrology, astronomy, medicine, science, algebra, coffee, all these things are linked to Islam.
Eye surgery.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess the point I'm making is, so if you take that example, you fast forward post World War One, World War Two time frame, and all these foreign misadventures that we go on because these mythical enemies that we create. Initially, we had the Soviets, the Red Scare. Then we had, we used Islam to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, and then we turned on Islam, right? And prior to 1948, I mean, if you look at the Middle East, the United States had no enemies in the Middle East prior to 1948. It's because of the actions of 1948 and creating these pseudo-colonial states in the region for whatever reason, religious reason, or for whatever reason, the United States sort of got embroiled into the Middle East, and now consequently, we've literally drained all our resources. We've got over 800 bases across the planet. We've become a global empire, an imperial empire, military empire, right? So when I was talking about that militarism that started World War One, we've got treaty and alliances with all other countries, with many other countries that we don't have shared values with. I mean, my view is very simple. Our values come from this document, the Constitution of the United States. And I always have a copy close by. In fact, I've got multiple copies. I'll send you one. I don't know if it applies to, here's another one. So my point is the values come out of this, right? Freedom, liberty, dignity, human rights, rule of law, justice, all these values are written in there. Now, a lot of them came from the scriptures, right? They came from the scriptures because obviously a lot of them were taken from the Bible. And if you read the Quran, it's very similar to what the Bible says. It's just really the Old Testament that continued on, right? I've read all those scriptures. And it's very important for us to understand the genesis of all this, right? And if you look at the civilizations over here, these people coexisted for hundreds of years. The Coptics, right? The Christians in the Levant, the Jews, until we started bringing in this penchant for power, this hunger for imperialism. And, the problem that I have with it is, I have a son that served in the Marines also. And I don't want my grandkids to serve in the Marines. I love the Marine Corps. Don't get me wrong. But the end state is we just shouldn't have a need for a Marine Corps because we all coexist peacefully, right? Respect each other and all that. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen. So after World War II, when this happened, where I'm taking this discussion to is 1926 is an organization that started out as a result of the backlash from what the West had done, carving up the Middle East. An organization that came about was the Muslim Brotherhood. Right, and that's sort of the Islamic perception of clash of civilizations. Muslim Brotherhood was preaching, "Hey, look at these guys. They're doing X, Y, and Z. They're just here to take your resources, steal your resources, have your women run around in bikinis and all that stuff." Right, and everybody galvanized around them, and then eventually they spread throughout the region. Influencing the Ba'ath Party in Iraq and Syria, in other places, and they became a problem. And now they've and in fact, Muslim Brotherhood took over Egypt, Morsi, if you remember, and so they did away with him, and and consequently, they also had the Shia movement started coming about because what we did in Iraq in 1953, when we had to led a coup against Mossadegh and threw him out. And we bring the Shah in, and Shah became so westernized that the Shias, the Ayatollah, started saying, "Hey, this is not who we are. This is not our culture." And so consequently, they got thrown out, and then we got a major problem in Iran right now with the Ayatollahs. But I fundamentally believe that these foreign misadventures, going back to the Crusades, will lead you into trouble. The Crusades led Europe into the Dark Ages when they could have coexisted like the Byzantine did. If you remember, the Byzantine Empire was all the way down to Baghdad, Iraq.
Yes.
Yeah. So it coexisted with these people and these cultures. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of this backlash from the Muslim Brotherhood and other groups that some of them we've funded? That the Mujahideen, which turned into Taliban, the Sons of Anbar, which turned into ISIS, and now we've got ISIS essentially in charge in Syria. And hopefully, they've redeemed themselves and they're not, the true ISIS anymore. But who knows?
Well, it's definitely true that there's been sort of this resurgent idea of some elements in Muslim countries foregrounding a really sort of traditionalist, sometimes extreme version
Sure.
of religious identity as a direct response to sort of Western misadventures in their countries, and saying, well, okay, so we're going to find ourselves as an identity in resistance. We're going to emphasize the parts of ourselves that are as different as possible from you guys because we don't like what you're doing. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood is definitely a problem. ISIS and the Taliban are horrendous, but I mean, a lot of these guys are directly involved in a very extreme version of Islam, which originates from Saudi. It's called Wahhabi Islam. And again, what people don't realize is that when we look at Islam, it's a huge tent. I mean, it's this enormous category. There are multiple different schools of jurisprudence and law where people have taken the same text and the same historical figures and the same traditions and interpreted them in different ways, different legitimate ways. There are different ways of seeing the same set of fundamental starting points within Islam, as of course there are in the Christian world as well. So we recognize complexity on our side of the world. We wouldn't say, unless you knew absolutely nothing about history, that, they're Christians, so they all have exactly the same beliefs and motivations. They move as a unit all the time. I mean, a peasant in Poland, who's Catholic in the 1200s, it wasn't called Poland, of course, is one person. A Protestant Christian in the late 1500s in Germany is another. A Protestant in Northern Ireland in 1980 is another. Like, yes, they're all Christian, but you can't reduce them to having the same motivations, behaviors, and priorities just because they happen to have this one religious label in common. They do have it in common, so there are some things they share, but they're also influenced by their geographical location, by their moment in history, by the immediate cultural considerations around them. Northern Ireland is different from Poland or Germany or America, right? We recognize this for ourselves, but somehow when we want to talk about Islam, it's just, no, it's this one block, and you know, and they're all the same, and they all want to wear black niqabs and stone people. It's bizarre to me, but this is being used right now. So I was shocked to discover when I was kind of looking at the recent uses of crusade that none other than Pete Hegseth, currently in the US government, wrote a book in 2020, I think it was, called American Crusade.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to see this idea actually being the headline of a book, you've got it by a sitting member of your government right now, and it follows a whole long line of other books that have presented this very simplified version, and basically say the West, especially America, has to be at war with Islam and the Muslim world. And so when you're talking about a strategy of invading, 7 countries in 5 years, how are you going to sell that strategy to people? You're going to tell them that their identity as American Christians is under threat by those people who hate, the God who hates, which was another title of a book written by, I think, Wafa Sultan a decade or so ago. These Muslims who just hate our freedoms, in the words of George Bush, who are our inveterate enemies. You're going to sell this war by presenting this cardboard, one-dimensional version of multiple countries, multiple cultures, very different geopolitical realities, but you're going to say, they all are Muslims, therefore they're all this, therefore they're all our enemies. You can create that reality with a narrative like that, but you're creating that reality. It doesn't need to be that way. And if we approach it with these ridiculous assumptions, then I think there's no way out of perpetual conflict. Because if you really believe that.
Yeah, so I think both sides demonize each other, the extremists on the Islam side, and then I would probably say, the not the extremists, but a good majority of the people in the United States probably view the East and Islam in a negative way because they don't know any better, right? But and one of the good things that happened in the global war on terrorism was, so many Americans served overseas in Muslim countries, and they saw the reality of it, and they came back thinking, these aren't bad people. And some great Americans went back to Afghanistan when the withdrawal was happening, trying to rescue, some of the Afghans that they worked with, because the loyalties they had and the friendships they had. I personally have probably taken over, 40 some Afghans and their families to the United States. And they're all doing great. They're all good people. And I'm happy for them, because at least they have an opportunity to better their lives, right? Which they wouldn't necessarily have that in Afghanistan. I'm a product of that, I mean, when my family immigrated from Pakistan to the United States, we got an opportunity. So that's why I've got so much respect and for the Constitution, because it gives you liberty, right? And
Yes.
and that's one of the reasons I joined the Marine Corps, because I owed it and I wanted to have deep roots in the American society. And my son followed up with it, But I don't want my grandchildren to be cannon fodder for the likes of Dick Cheney and George Bush and these other people that are the neocons who are on the other side of this debate that we're talking about, and they're the ones that are leading this crusade. So the main reason I wanted to get you onto this show was to talk about the crusade and say, we got to stop this nonsense. Crusades are part of history, but let's learn the real lessons from them. It's not these tattoos that we got on our arms and symbology and all that. It's, hey, we killed a lot of people on both sides, and it wasn't good. It drove Europe into the Dark Ages. My concern right now is the United States keeps going on the path that we currently are. We're going to end up in the Dark Ages. We've bankrupted ourselves, and America is under a health crisis, it's a criminal crisis, a drug crisis. We've got all sorts of these other crises going on. 50 million Americans are food insecure. Now, what does that mean? Food insecure means they don't know where they're going to get their meal tomorrow. They know where they're going to eat today. They don't know where they're going to get their meal tomorrow. The same number has less than $400 for emergency funds. 50 million. And it seems to me that nobody gives a shit about this. We're more fixated on some mullah sitting somewhere, I don't give it, and most of these mullahs nobody listens to. I'll give you an example, real world example. When I was a battalion commander in Afghanistan, and I came to this village, and this mullah I'd hear him, babbling away, and I went down to the mosque and I visited him, and I told him, I said, "Have you done the Hajj?" He's like, "No, sir." So I said, "I've done it twice, so I'm a double Haji, right?" And where are you getting this horse shit from that you're telling all these kids? Do you even speak Arabic? Nope. Do you know how to read? Nope. He's just making shit up. So I pulled out my little GPS. In those days, we had little GPSs. I know where this. Next time I hear you saying this crap, I'll drop a 2,000-pound bomb on your head. You hear me? And I walked away. And the guy's like, "Holy shit," and then. A few weeks later, I went back there and told, "Hey, go get me the mullah." He comes and he grabs my feet, because I used to always sit in a chair. They want position of authority, right? And he's like, "Hey, sir, I didn't say anything." But I said, "I know, but you're not going home tonight. You're going to stay here with me and be my guest. And I'm going to take you on a mission at 3 a.m. And we went, sealed off this compound and stuff. And what I wanted them to see firsthand was how well the Marines treated the locals. Respect. We even had women Marines there for women Afghans to search them. And once the mullah saw that, he was converted. He's like, "Yeah, because he's being fed propaganda by the Taliban." So you got to work to build bridges, and building bridges is not easy. Destroying bridges, is like that. And I think that's the part that's missing. So when people like yourselves talk about history, and you give both sides, and then you give an analysis of saying, "Hey, atrocities happen on both sides. Both are guilty. But do we want to continue living this life for generations and hundreds of years? We don't." You were talking about those Turkmens, right? I'm sure you've heard of Tamerlan. Tamerlan?
Oh, yes.
The guy was a madman. He was a nut job, right? He ruled like 15% of the world at one time, and he's from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, that area, right? It was Central Republics. Nobody paid attention to these borders that we've created. And he killed 5% of the known world at one time. I mean, think of it. He was a nut. He's a madman. I mean, he had all sorts of instruments where there's also a place in, everybody knows the Khyber Pass. There's a chute that they built out of this rocks, right? And they put swords inside it. And if you're found guilty, you're going to get thrown down that chute. And you come out the other end, there's dogs sitting there, they got mincemeat. I mean, that's the way these people thought. They're nut jobs, And, and we can say a lot about the Afghan culture, but it's their culture. You know, if Afghanistan wants to change, Afghan mothers need to raise better sons. It's really that simple, you know, in Khan's view, because there's a saying in the eastern part of the world is you find heaven in the bottom of your mother's feet. Every young child is taught that. You find heaven in the bottom of your mother's feet. That's the esteem that they put the mother at, you know, right below God. You know, God, mother, Prophet Muhammad, and all that. You know, it's right up there. That's how they treat their mothers. And so the Afghan mothers really need to do a slightly better job raising better kids, right? And I understand the cultural imperatives and all that stuff. I get it. I get it, and I really sympathize with what's going on over there. But we can't get wrapped up in these problems. And the point that you made about that was our objective about the women, right? But it wasn't an enduring objective, right?
No.
It got us into the fight, but then we forgot about it. Then we got to, you know, it was you know, democracy. We're going to start doing democracy now. Forget the women. We're doing democracy. If we really gave a shit about women, we would have built some hospitals. We should have built some clinics, you know, midwife clinics.
But you know, the thing is, we did. And I know people who worked in those schools, libraries. There were hospitals, there were health clinics, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, but apparently we weren't interested in democracy either, because when we decided to cut and run, it was a very, very hasty job, gone. And there's not, I mean, all of the institutions, from the political ones to the healthcare ones to the education ones, were overturned so rapidly as the Taliban roll out of the hills, and everyone goes, "Oh boy, here we go again."
But we built them in the wrong places, Eva.
Yes.
We didn't go in the rural areas and build them where they needed to be built. That was the problem, right? Because I went to these rural areas. I'll give you another example. I'm sitting outside this one village, and everywhere I went, this is high Sierra Nevada type area, you know, high desert, you know, 8, 9, 10,000 feet. And water is a big issue, right? And everybody's telling me water, water, water. So one day I'm sitting there and I'm like, I got to help these people. You know, we just can't kill our way out of it. And dig a well, you know, very simple. You know, Marine colonels get paid big bucks to think these thoughts, right? So I don't know how to dig a well. I've got no clue. So I told my Marines, go get me the shopkeeper in this village. Now his shop is probably 10 by 10, you know, cheap candy, sugar, rice, flour, matches, cigarettes. That's about all he sells. So he comes in, you know, I'm sitting in the chair. He comes, grab my feet. Sir, I'm not Taliban. I said, I know. Grab a seat. I said, what do you do? I'm a shopkeeper, sir. Says, you're like a businessman, right? Yes, sir. What'd your father do? He was a shopkeeper too. So your father's a businessman also, right? Yes, sir. I said, well, I've got a business proposition. I want you to dig a well. He goes, I don't know how to dig a well. I said, neither do I. But you told me you're a businessman. Go down to Kandahar, find the well digger, figure it out, and whatever it costs to dig the well, I'll pay you double. And you got 2 weeks. I'll be back in 2 weeks. And if there's not water in that well, I'm going to bury you in that thing. You hear me? And, you know, he didn't have time to, I said, don't even finish your tea. Go. You're out of time, bud. And, you know, he's gone. 2 weeks later, I show up. He's got a well. I got pictures. You know what? And by the time he put all the receipts together, it was like $1,960 or some nonsense. Like, so I told my finance guy, I said, round it up to 2,000, give him 4,000. He dug 21 wells, Eva. 21 wells. You know what it costs to dig one well by USAID? $65,000. We were doing it for 4,000.
Wow.
So, you know, and that's how you sort of reach out and make, you know, relationships and loyalties of these people and all that stuff.
Yes.
But we never understood it. It was this you know, this baggage we're carrying in the back of our minds, that cardboard image that we had. And you know, the Afghan people, they like to hug, right? And they smell because they can't afford deodorant, right? I mean, that's what it is. But I lived in the field for almost 4 months. We didn't take a shower, so I'm sure I stunk too, right? But when I hugged them like a man, right? And they felt it. They felt it. But when we went through the motions, we kind of just, you know, and they would say that to me. That guy's a lamb. You know, he's not a man. You know, the stuff like that, because they pick up on it, because these guys have been survivors for thousands of years. They can smell it. They're like, you know, so you really have to show your affection and you really, you know, loyalty. And they're great people. I mean, I loved it. You know, so just getting back on track on this thing. So, I mean, what were some of the lessons you would say that apply to modern times from the Crusades? I mean, we obviously talked about some of them, but did you glean anything in your studies and in your presentations?
And actually, a counterpoint comes up historically, which I can tie directly to what you just said about wells. Okay, so hear me out.
Yeah.
The First Crusade is happening from 1096 to 1099 ish, right? Almost a contemporary of this time. When we get into like the early 1100s, you have another Western knight. He's a Norman, so descended from the Norsemen,
Yeah.
some kind of a Viking descendant guy.
Yeah.
Okay. By the name of Roger II, and actually he's directly related to one of the heroes of the First Crusade, Bohemond, like guys from the same Norman family. Some of them go east and some of them go into southern Italy. Now, Roger II's father basically takes over Sicily. Sicily at the time was Muslim. It was entirely Muslim. It was ruled by Muslims and heavily populated by Muslims. So now Roger has to make a decision when he goes in there, which is, how am I going to set myself up to rule over these people who are culturally, religiously, linguistically different from me? I'm this outsider. I'm this Norseman guy. I speak French. I speak Latin. You know, these guys here are speaking Greek. They're speaking Arabic. You know, it's very, very different. And he makes a very interesting decision. When he takes Palermo, the capital of Sicily, he says to them, listen, if you guys surrender to me, everyone can go about their daily life with very little change. I'm not going to allow my guys to sack your city and loot everything. We're not going to kill anybody. We're not going to even fire the government officials and everything from their jobs. Everything can stay just as it is. The only difference is we're going to get one of my guys who's going to be the chief governor of the city and kind of oversee things. And now your taxes are going to me. We've kicked out the other Muslim governor who was in charge. It's now a Norman guy. But other than that, you can go to your mosque. You can continue your business. We're going to respect your property. We're going to respect your families. We're not going to be raping anyone's wife or daughter. And guess what? It works.
Yeah.
So when the Normans go in and they treat the Muslim population like human beings with respect, Roger II, who inherits this, the Muslim guys are some of the most loyal elements of his army. They're the ones that he takes on campaign when he goes out of Sicily onto mainland southern Italy to deal with some of his territorial problems there. And Roger II is really interested in having the brightest, most intelligent, most educated people in his court. So he's always looking for scholars and wise men. So he brings in this North African guy called Muhammad al-Idrisi. Muhammad al-Idrisi is a scholar. He's a great geographer. And King Roger II says to him, hey, look, I have this project. I want to make an actual map of the entire known world that is functional. Because medieval maps, and I actually have an image of one in the series on the Normans in Italy where I'm telling the story, are basically very fanciful. You cannot navigate from them. They have dragons drawn in the corner. They have Jerusalem in the middle. Everything is a circle. There are some random bits of water. You can't navigate with this. I mean, it's ridiculous. So King Roger says, listen, I want to talk to the merchants who are walking up and down the routes and who know the cities. I want to look at the historical documents that we have from every scholar who's ever written. We're going to interview travelers that come into Palermo who've been to some of these cities. We're going to compare their reports with all these other reports. We're going to try and figure out, you know, what's the most accurate report. We're going to put all this down. And he puts al-Idrisi in charge of this project. And they work on this for more than a decade. By the time they're done, they have the best map of the world that was ever produced in the medieval period. And this increase of knowledge happens because you have a cross-cultural collaboration. Roger II isn't interested in the fact that al-Idrisi is a Muslim, and he's not. He's interested in the fact that al-Idrisi is a smart guy, and he's the best guy for the job. So they work together cheek by jowl for more than a decade to make this happen. And they're able to produce this amazing map, which is unfortunately lost. Because as soon as Roger dies, there's this palace coup and the map is destroyed. And al-Idrisi says, oh my God, I'm getting out of here because it's not safe for me anymore. But it's a moment where you have stability, you have prosperity. Sicily becomes the wealthiest place in Europe by many reports, because you're not having this constant infighting between the newcomers who are Latin Christians and the existing populations of Greek Christians and Muslims who are already there. He treats all of his citizens like human beings. He respects their property. He respects their religion. And guess what? It works well for everybody. So I bring this back to what you're saying right here. When you're talking about bringing wells into people's villages, when you're talking about treating them with respect, so having women armed forces members interact with the women, not having a man, a foreign man, come in there and put his hands on, a woman in that village. By paying attention to basic courtesies like this, you can prevent some really serious problems from forming and create the opportunity for people to say, hey, you know what? If these newcomers, these foreigners who are coming in here are treating us well or better than our previous condition, we're fine to have you guys around.
Yeah, we get along.
But exactly.
Have you been to Dubai?
No.
You need to. And I'll tell you why. Because everything you just described, Sicily, I'm sitting here thinking about Dubai, right? Because what Dubai's done, and people wrongly in the West think that Dubai is just, rich Arabs walking around with all this oil money. 5% of Dubai's GDP is from oil, only 5%. The remaining 95% is probably from innovation, from business, and inviting the world in, creating a stable organization where people of any religion, any ethnicity, any background can coexist, right? And Dubai, oh, by the way, also has a minister of happiness. I mean, they actually, I kid you not, they actually, and I'm not sure, how they measure it, but at least they're paying attention to it. Happiness is important. And then I've been very lucky. I've traveled to over 100 countries, right? And I go to some countries and I'll sit there and I'll think about it. I say, it's so unfortunate that the elders and the government are failing their people, because it's really upon the elders, right? Because we have an obligation to give everybody the best possible conditions and lifestyle that country or that culture can afford, right? And so when you go to some of these other countries, and I won't name them, but when you go over there, it's so restrictive that you take a cell phone in and they tax a tourist for a cell phone, because they're trying to make money anywhere they can. And where's the money going to? It's being wasted. It's being wasted by the government. So when you come to Dubai, you see infrastructure being built, roads, literally brand new roads appear in a week. They'll just build this road, and everybody has a common vision that emanates from the sheikh, and when the sheikh says something, everybody gets behind him and they do it. And they unify themselves, right? So that unity is important. And the reason being is because he'll tell everybody, I want my people, which means everybody, all nationalities, all religions, my people to be happy. That's his primary focus. He drives around himself. I've seen him. There's no, motorcades and there's no bodyguards. He's in his G-Wagon driving along, waving at people. I've seen him at Starbucks. He'll come sit down at Starbucks, orders a coffee, sits there, drinks it, and sometimes if he's in a good mood, he'll pay for everybody. But other times he'll just. I had a guest one time. I was in Dubai, and there's a really good supermarket. This is a great little story. Let's get off on a segue. They used to make fresh food. There's an Afghan friend of mine. So so I took him there, and he's getting mad at me. He's like, Colonel, why'd you bring me to a supermarket? Because they want to go to these big name Michelin star restaurants, right? I'm like, just eat the food, you'll like it. And he's like irritated. He comes all the way over here and to Dubai, and so we're sitting there, and he likes Italian food. An Afghan like Italian, so good for him. And he's eating it. He's like, yeah, it's pretty good. I said, I told you they make the pasta fresh, man. A few minutes later, guess who walks in? Sheikh Mohammed, and he sits down at the table next to us. And my buddy's like, and I'm like, and he's like, taking selfies and sending to all his friends in Afghanistan. Hey, I'm eating lunch with Sheikh Mohammed, in Dubai. But my point is, there's this interaction between the leadership and the people. And, I was taught in the military that you always supervise and you walk around, right? And Sheikh Mohammed pops up in different places all across Dubai to see how things are going. And here's another neat little thing he did. When you go to normal immigration, there's a camera on you, right? And the immigration officer tells you, hey, get in front of the camera, they take your picture, right? Guess what they have in Dubai? They got a camera on the immigration officer too, to make sure he's smiling. I kid you not. So these little things that you do go a long way. So when you come through Dubai immigration, everybody's smiling. There's no crime in Dubai. None. None. Everybody gets along. Everybody's polite. You can't use the F word. You can't flip anybody off. You do that, and you get reported, you're done. So there's an expectation of good behavior. And they're very clear. These are the rules that we expect you to follow. If you want to wear a bikini, wear a bikini. If you want to wear a burqa, wear a burqa. It's up to you, whatever. You want to go to church, go to church. You want to go to temple, Hindu temples, they got synagogues here. They got, the mosques, they got everything there. So Dubai is very interesting. And why can't the rest of the world be like that?
Yeah. Well, see, it's about what is it that's important for people to have in common.
Right.
And there are two different views of this historically. One of them is that, it's very important for everyone to share the same religion. Well, that might work at a small scale. If you've got a tribe or a very small society, then that might work for a while. But the minute you start getting books and complexity, even people who began with the same set of beliefs and share the same religious identity are going to begin to see things a little bit differently from each other. And so insisting on religious sameness is a quest that is doomed to failure. And we've seen some really spectacular failures. I mean, if you look at Spain, the Spanish Inquisition was about making sure that everyone had the same religion in Spain. And this ultimately involved not just the confiscation of wealth and the imprisonment and torture of people, but it involved kicking out entire communities, the Muslims, the Jews, etc., and persecuting many people who'd converted to being Christians, but from other ethnicities, and they were suspect. So it was a disaster. Now, instead of that, you obviously need something that unites people. How are they going to live together? So you need some kind of shared set of values. Now, you're locating one in the Constitution, and the idea of the modern secular state, which is the product of the Enlightenment, which is a profound leap forward for human beings, is that we can live together with differences in our ethnicities and our backgrounds and our histories, if we're able to sign on to a shared set of rules that we agree are going to govern our society, and importantly, are going to apply equally to everybody. Right. You can't have some privileged class that is going to be above these laws, and then these laws are going to apply to everybody else. Everyone sees that. That's going to create resentment. It's going to create anger. It's going to create violence. It doesn't work. So if you're going to have this set of rules, values, document, whatever it is, that people are going to sign on to, it has to apply equally. That's what the rule of law means. And when that is set up and it's functioning the way it should, you get the free societies that we have celebrated and many people have given their lives to defend. But the minute you start corrupting that by saying, yeah, we said that, but actually, some communities are a little bit more equal than others, or these laws are going to apply on a sliding scale, these people get to practice their religion however they want, but you guys can't. Well, now people see that set of rules doesn't apply equally, and it's going to create divisions, it's going to create problems, it's going to create resentment. So it sounds like in Dubai, what they've got is a shared set of rules that people sign on to and they abide by. And what you have is a stable environment where people from different communities can enjoy respect and can have their property and can interact in a civil way with others. And it benefits everybody.
Right.
Which is the same thing that the Normans did in Sicily, right? This is what's going on over there. And this is what America at its best is supposed to be doing.
Yeah, so that's one of the positive lessons out of the Crusades, right? To create this homogeneous society that respects, although it's homogeneous based on law, but it respects each other's differences, right?
So it's heterogeneous in terms of communities, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's powerful. And, so Dubai is a microcosm, for the greater world, right? That it should be. Singapore is another one that I found to be very similar as Dubai, and they sort of copy each other. Hong Kong is another one. I was just recently in Hong Kong, so that's kind of a neat place also. And but then when you go to these other places, so the problem, that I see is whenever religion starts playing a dominant role in a society, you're bound to get in trouble, right? I mean, you look at Iran, you look at Israel, you look at Pakistan, you look at Afghanistan,
Yeah.
and then you look at certain sectors in the United States, certain regions where religion plays. I live in. I mean, I lived in the middle of the Bible Belt, right? And I'll tell you what, my value system and theirs is very much the same. I mean, we essentially believe in the same stuff, right? But they've got extremists also. I think I mentioned that to you previously, where you've got churches in Tennessee that worship snakes, serpents, right? Because there's serpents in the Bible. So this guy's taking it to the next level. I'm taking it to the very extreme level. I'm gonna and so they used to bring people in. So I've heard. I've never been in that church, but that if you've sinned, they put you in front of the serpent, and the serpent bites you. You sinned. Then you go to the hospital, or whatever, go get the poison out. What so happened was that the serpent bit the pastor, and the pastor died.
Oh.
So was that a who the hell knows? So some of these people are freaky. I mean, there's a lot of nut jobs like that throughout the world, in all communities, in all religions, right?
Yeah.
And I was hoping that we could glean the lessons out of the Crusades, and I think the number one lesson that just talking about it with you is the Crusades led to the Dark Ages. They backfired. Although we can glamorize them, and a lot of people do, about knights and chivalry and shields and armors and all that stuff. At the end of the day, it destroyed Europe. And Europe resurrected itself for a couple of hundred years through colonialism, and look at the mess it's in now.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you a Crusader story that is not often mentioned, which is that the Crusades began as these foreign military adventures against the savage infidels.
Yeah.
But by the time they get to, I think it's the Fourth Crusade, it's sometimes called the Albigensian Crusade, they're doing it to their own people in France.
Yeah.
What's happened is the Pope has said, oh, we've got these people in southern France. They're called the Cathars or the Albigensians. We call them heretics. So they think that they're Christians, but we think they're not following the doctrines of the Catholic Church
Happens all the time.
properly. And so the Pope says, hey guys, special deal. You can get all the benefits, the spiritual benefits of going on crusade, but you don't have to spend months or years going east. You can just ride down to southern France every summer and spend your time besieging European cities and butchering their populations. And there's this famous anecdote where one of the knights, one of the nobles in charge of these divisions, is lined up. He's on his horse. They're outside the gates of a city that they've besieged, and they're about to get in. Like the guys are breaching the walls. They're going to be going through the gate.
Right.
And he turns to the papal legate, or the Pope's representative who's riding with them, and he says, I'm sure there are some Albigensians in this city, but we know that there are Catholic Christians and others in here as well. I mean, how do we know who's who? And the legate supposedly replies, kill them all. God will know his own.
He'll sort them out.
Yeah, kill them all. Let God sort them out. And so what I'm trying to say is that exactly what you said. When you put religion and you fuse it with the power of government, and you say that the government is going to become an instrument for enforcing religious purity or a single religious identity, it ends in disaster every time. This is the whole purpose of the American Constitution. The founding fathers knew this. They'd seen it firsthand. They were well aware of European history, and they said, we need to set this up right so that we can prevent government being used as a tool for religious enforcement. And this is why you have a secular constitution, which is equal, and it's supposed to treat different religious communities equally. We are not going to be policing, we are not going to be defending the Baptists against the Presbyterians and the Catholics, for example, right? We are not going to privilege the Methodists over the Unitarians or anything like that. We're going to say you have the freedom to practice your religion, follow the law, pay your taxes, and your theological differences are fine. You can have those out in conversation.
In the United States, didn't the Salem witch trials is kind of an example of what you're talking about?
To some extent. I mean, I did an episode on, it was actually the very first episode or the very first series I ever did on Villains and Virgins podcast, was a series on the Salem witch trials. And the interesting thing about Salem is that it's founded by Puritans. So these
Right.
guys are actually pretty hardcore religious extremists
Yeah.
who come from England, and they've left because they were being persecuted by the state church, the Church of England. And we have been told this story about the Puritans who came to establish religious freedom, but they wanted the freedom to practice their religion the way they saw it. If you wanted to practice Christianity some other way, there was no tolerance for that. So, for example, they hung a woman who was a Quaker because she kept talking about her Quaker views on things. And they said, well, we don't have any place for that here. You're either going to be a Puritan just like us and go to our churches and be a standing member and follow our rules, or, you're not going to last so long. So there wasn't actually a lot of religious toleration. It was within your own community. You can be the freedom to be one of us.
Right.
If you want to be somebody else, you better go found another colony down the road or leave town, because it's not going to go well for you.
And that's exactly what they did. I mean, that's how the U.S. expanded, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at it, the Mormons, Mormons got all the way out to the Utahs because was the only place they could go practice their religion. So
Yeah.
that happened in the United States. But the sad part is, just this past week, I don't know if you've stayed abreast of it, the government, the IRS, has backed off on a case because somebody sued them that now churches can participate in political events and they don't lose their tax
Their tax-free status. Yeah.
their status. They
Wow.
won't lose it, which is a big deal now, because if you go back
yeah.
into the politics of the United States, it was President Reagan that brought the Christian coalition out from the churches to participate in politics, and that's how he got into office. Now, that's a separate discussion. Was he a good president or a bad president? But they came out in full force, the Christian coalition, and they've been participating in politics ever since. I mean, many of our senators and congressmen are pastors. We don't
Yes.
we don't know that, and we don't realize that because they kind of keep it quiet, right? And this guy Ted Cruz. Have you seen his most recent interview with Tucker Carlson?
Is this the one where he's talking about how the Bible says that anyone who blesses Israel is blessed, and
it's not
that I was so baffled. I was wordless, actually. I mean, that you're looking at a text which is thousands of years old, and because it has the word Israel in there,
It doesn't.
you think that it means the modern nation state since it's just absolutely
No, it says
beyond comprehension.
Bless you. There's no word Israel in that sentence that he's talking about because they pulled it up. It says, those it says you. There's no Israel in there in that sentence.
Right.
You means the children of God. That's what it says. But you know what? We're just twisting the Bible now, and there's another interpretation. So these people are they're very dangerous, right? In my opinion.
They are.
And I've spent a lot of time, trust me, sitting down and talking to the Taliban, having these discussions with them. And you sit there, and although I respect their views, because we're just having an intellectual conversation, but I'm sitting there thinking, man, these people are nuts. I would not want any part of it. Their version of Sharia law, I want no part of, right? Because it's in the dark ages.
Yes.
I'm very happy with this. Very happy.
But you know what? There are these religious extremists in the U.S. I was astonished last week to see this footage of a pastor. His name is Doug Wilson from Moscow, Idaho. Okay.
Yeah.
And he got a profile for saying some pretty incendiary things. So he's apparently talked about stoning gay people, and also that women shouldn't be allowed to wear pants or anything like that, that they have to wear what he defines as female clothing. So when you look at this, we want to talk a lot about some crazy mullah or Taliban that's out here talking about stoning and regulating what women wear. But when it's a white American guy from Moscow, Idaho, who's a pastor and a theologian by his own profile, saying these things, we go, oh, well, that guy's just crazy. He doesn't represent all Christians, right?
Yeah.
We know that, but we're perfectly happy to pick out that nutty mullah or the Taliban and say he
And
represents
yeah.
all the Muslims.
Yeah. Or, conversely, when I tell people, hey, I'm an American Muslim, I spent 20 some years in the Marine Corps. And you know what the response is? Well, you're an exception. I mean, how do you, it's tough to have an intellectual conversation with that type of mindset, right? Because the mind is closed.
Yes.
And so, and I have these conversations very often with people because I'm proud of the fact that I'm an American. I'm proud of the fact that I'm a Muslim, and I'm proud of the fact that I serve my country. And and I had to go fight nut jobs, of the same faith or whatever they claim to be, and what have you. And I did it unhesitatingly. I didn't think twice about it. It wasn't, oh my God, I'm going to fight. It was my duty, and I did it. And that's what people don't understand is, like even in Islam, there's a saying, obey authority, and once you take an oath, you got to live by it. And I've done that, and so has my son. So I could take great pride in that. Do you have any parting comments?
No, I think that was a great conversation, and I think in closing, I would just say that some of our greatest advances in human societies have been when we've been able to collaborate with each other, when we're able to utilize all of the resources, all of the education and the intelligence and the creativity that is around us. But when we start tribalizing ourselves and saying, if you have a different religion than me, or a different skin color than me, we're just fundamentally different and we are automatically hostile and we can never work together, we impoverish ourselves. We cut ourselves off from opportunities that could benefit everybody, because we're simply saying, well, now instead of having access to this entire pool of human intelligence, knowledge, resources, I'm going to limit myself to this piece over here. So this makes everyone here less well off, and vice versa. And I think that history teaches us this again and again. And I'm not a utopian. I'm not suggesting that, countries don't need armies and everyone is going to sit around and sing Kumbaya all the time. I mean, I have a deep respect for your profession. I have serving members of the armed forces in my family.
Yes.
But we have to be intelligent about how we use our military, about how we're thinking about foreign policy. And if it's a foreign policy or a set of decisions we're making, either within our societies or as we engage with other people abroad, that is bereft of history and that is based on myths and stereotypes, we impoverish ourselves and we dramatically increase the potential for conflict and violence, which again is worse off for everybody. The people in the societies you decimate and the soldiers who come home broken as a result of that. Nobody does well by this.
I got a question to save round, I guess. In your research of the Crusades, did you ever come across anybody that kind of raised their hand and said, this is wrong? We shouldn't be doing this?
Oh, yes. And I'm going to get a whole heap of angry people after Monday when I release the third episode where we actually talk about the sacking of Jerusalem, because there are people even now who are busy peddling this version of the Crusades as the noble, civilized West against the savage, barbaric East. And so if you tell the truth about it and you say, well, there were brave Western knights. I mean, Bohemond was an amazing general and a real fighter and a guy who inspired his men. I mean, I'm not flattening it the other direction. There were brave men in the Crusades. They were brilliant. There were some brilliant military minds. But when you complicate the narrative and say, the Crusaders, some of them were brave, some of them were cannibals, some of them butchered babies, and there was a whole mess of people here. And guess what? The Muslims, some of them were bad. Some of them were very civilized and humane. Wait a second. Now I'm messing with the myth.
Yeah.
I'm messing with the simple good guys, bad guys, superhero movie plot, right? Where it's very simple. The good guys are Western knights, the bad guys are brown Muslims, and that's just how it is. And that's a myth that people still want to carry around because it justifies some of their existing attitudes. So by messing with that, you make people uncomfortable. And instead of saying, maybe what I'm thinking about or my ideas were wrong, it's always easier just to demonize the person who presents you with the challenge and say, you're lying, or you're a woke historian,
Yeah.
whatever the hell that's supposed to mean, right? I mean, it
They're-
means it means you make me uncomfortable.
Yeah. During the Crusades, was there a general or a clergyman or somebody that said, stop, this is wrong. This is not who we are. This violates the tenets of the gospel of Christ. Did anybody stand up and do that, or everybody just went along like sheep because they didn't want to get ostracized?
There were a whole lot of different elements in there. Even amongst the leadership themselves, there were very different ideas, very different views. And one of the problems was they didn't have a clear leader. You had a bunch of nobles who kind of
Yeah.
got together and made decisions by committee, and then they started quarreling amongst themselves. So there were some crusaders who rode off and tried to, convert people at sword point.
Yeah.
There were other crusaders, like a guy called Tancred, another Norman, who said, hey, if these Muslim guys surrendered to us, we gave our word that they're going to have safe passage out of here. We're not going to butcher them.
Yeah.
Right. So there were differences. And there were some crusaders, Raymond of Toulouse was another one, who had given their word and said, if you surrender to me, I'm going to make sure you get out safe. We're not going to cut you down when you put your weapons down. So there were some guys who had those principles
Moral principles.
and were known for keeping their words. And so when the crusading army rolls up at other places, the guys are like, yeah, if his name is Raymond of Toulouse, we're going to surrender to him. The rest of you guys, we don't trust because we saw what you did. So there definitely were these differences, but there wasn't, one clear head who was in charge of disciplining the ranks and saying, this is allowed, that is not, you broke the rules, that's disorderly conduct, into the brig with you, not so much.
The reason I ask that is because, in modern times, I mean, if you go all the way, since World War II, if you look at these misadventures that America's been on, and we've committed some atrocities, don't get me wrong, Agent Orange, Vietnam. I mean, I went to Vietnam and I cried in the War Remembrance Museum. I mean, I literally, and I got no roots to Vietnam. I mean, I served with some Vietnam later on, generation. But the atrocities that happened, there's just mind-blowing stuff, napalm on civilians and all that. And I'm standing there thinking, and we were taught about honor, integrity, courage, discipline, and no general officer stood up and said, this is wrong. Stop it. Nobody did, right? And that's the function of an officer, that you're willing to take your bars or stars down and put them on the table and say, hey, I'm not doing this. I resign. But we don't have those type of people, those men of honor, that are willing to do that. Same thing in Iraq. This is wrong. We're not going to do it, because the Constitution, there's only one entity under U.S. law that can take us to war. I don't expect you to know it, but it's the U.S. Congress is the only entity that can declare war. And you know how many times the U.S. Congress has declared war? 5 times. 5 times. The last time, where it declared it? World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And we keep going to war. We keep bombing the hell out of every country that we want, but it's illegal. It's wrong, but our generals just salute and say, yep, I'm going to go do it. And, there's a time and place. If America's under attack, by all means, we don't need to go to Congress and all that. We've got to, defend our country. But when you're going to go out on these misadventures, somebody needs to sit there and think it through and say, okay, what's the backblast? Or is it really driving us to the dark ages? And I don't think that type of moral courage exists anymore, And I think it's coming out from the veterans, because we've been there, we've seen it, and we've seen that this notion of collaboration instead of confrontation. Our policy is based on confrontation. You don't do X, Y, Z, we're going to bomb you. Why don't we try to collaborate with China? Why don't we try to collaborate with Russia? And try to live together rather than spend. Do you realize how much we've spent since 2020 to 2024 on the defense industry?
The math is staggering.
$2.4 trillion, Eva. $2.4 trillion. Can you imagine? Yeah. You want to solve the burqa problem in Afghanistan? That's the issue. That's where the money went. And all the hospitals and clinics that we talked about that we built. We built the freaking hospitals and we built the clinics. They weren't staffed. There's nobody teaching them. There's no teachers there because, nobody thought it through. this is a great one. You know, in 2001, I had a fairly prominent role in, you know, when the Afghanistan thing was starting out. And I recommended that we put a nuclear power plant at Bagram. And people thought I was nuts. They looked at me, they said, "Are you, you know, did you get enough sleep last night, Colonel?" I said, "Yeah, I did. But I'll tell you why, because as soon as you put a nuclear power plant at Bagram, then the problem becomes a transmission and distribution issue, right? And at that time, Afghanistan only needed 10 megawatts. That's it. So what we did was we set up all these generators throughout Afghanistan, right? To give them power, electricity, because without electricity, you can't do anything. The economy is not going to move forward. But guess what that created? A bigger problem, because the generators needed fuel. So all that fuel had to come through where? Through Pakistan, through the Khyber Pass, and on the roads of Afghanistan. And guess who controlled the roads? The Taliban did. So then we've got these security companies paying off the Taliban to get those fuel trucks through safe passage. And Taliban's making money off it. They think we were nothing more than an ATM machine, you know,
Yeah.
PIN code. Yeah. So you know, these idiosyncrasies that happen when you go on foreign misadventures, and by the time you look back, you know, 10 years later and say, "Holy shit, you know, we really screwed this up," it's too late. And that's exactly what happened. And it's sad, man. It really is.